John Harper sat alone in the dimly lit living room, staring blankly at the wall. The house felt eerily quiet now. Too quiet. It had only been 2 weeks since his world came crashing down when he lost Emily, his beloved 16-year-old daughter. She was everything to him, his joy, his pride, and the light of his life. But one fateful evening, a reckless driver changed everything forever. Now all that remained were memories frozen in time, photographs scattered across tables, her favorite sweater hanging on the back of a chair, and an empty bedroom that still smelled faintly of her perfume. Grief weighed heavily on John's shoulders. He barely slept, and when he did, nightmares haunted him. In those dreams, he relived the moment he received the phone call about the accident over and over again. His heart would race, and he'd wake up drenched in sweat, reaching out for someone who wasn't there. Days blurred into nights as he tried to cope with the unbearable void left by Emily's absence. Friends and family visited often, offering condolences and support, but their words felt hollow. Nothing could fill the chasm inside him. One afternoon, while sorting through Emily's belongings to prepare for the funeral, John stumbled upon an old camera she used to take everywhere. It was small, compact, and capable of recording high-definition video. As he held it in his hands, memories flooded back, Emily laughing as she filmed silly videos of their dog chasing its tail, capturing sunsets during family road trips, or documenting moments they shared baking cookies together. Her passion for photography had always been infectious, and John couldn't help but smile faintly at the thought of how much she loved capturing life. But then a strange idea began to form in his mind, an idea born out of desperation and longing. What if he could somehow stay connected to Emily, even just a little longer? The thought consumed him. He knew it sounded irrational, even crazy, but the pain of losing her made logic irrelevant. That's when the plan took shape. If he placed the camera inside her coffin, maybe, just maybe, he could capture something, anything, a sound, a shadow, proof that she wasn't completely gone. The more he thought about it, the more determined he became. John convinced himself that this wasn't about defying death. It was about holding on to hope. Hope that somewhere, somehow, Emily might still exist beyond the physical realm. He didn't tell anyone. Not his wife, not his closest friends. This was something he needed to do alone, a private act between a grieving father and his child. The day of the funeral, John carried the camera hidden in his coat pocket. The ceremony was somber, filled with tears and heartfelt speeches from those who loved Emily. As the coffin was lowered into the ground, John slipped the device inside before it was sealed shut. No one noticed. To everyone else, it was simply another heartbreaking goodbye. But for John, it marked the beginning of an experiment, a desperate attempt to bridge the gap between life and whatever lay beyond. That night, after the cemetery emptied and darkness enveloped the world, John returned to Emily's grave. He brought along his laptop and a wireless receiver to access the camera's feed. His hands trembled as he set up the equipment, unsure of what he might find, or whether he'd find anything at all. For a long while he sat in silence, listening to the rustling leaves and distant hoots of owls. Then finally, he pressed play. At first, the footage showed nothing unusual. The interior of the coffin appeared dark and still, exactly as one would expect. John sighed, wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe this whole thing was pointless, a foolish attempt to cling to something he could never have back. Just as he started to pack up, however, something caught his eye. A faint glow emerged from within the coffin. It wasn't bright enough to illuminate the space fully, but it was undeniable. A soft, pulsating light that seemed to breathe like a living thing. John leaned closer to the screen, his pulse quickening. The glow grew stronger, casting eerie shadows on the polished wood of the coffin. His breath hitched as he realized the shadows weren't static. They moved, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but definitely shifting. Was it a trick of the light? Some kind of reflection? Or was it something more? As he watched, transfixed, a chill ran down his spine. This wasn't what he'd expected. Not at all. But instead of fear, a spark of curiosity ignited within him. Could this be real? Could Emily really be trying to communicate with him? The questions swirled in his mind, pulling him deeper into a mystery he couldn't yet comprehend. For the first time since her passing, John felt a flicker of something other than despair. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was hope. And in that moment, hope was enough. The night after the funeral, John Harper found himself unable to stay away from Emily's grave. The memory of the glowing light inside her coffin lingered in his mind like an unanswered question, tugging at him relentlessly. Sleep eluded him, and even when he closed his eyes, all he could see was that faint, pulsating glow on the screen. He knew he had to go back, to confirm what he'd seen, to make sense of it, or maybe just to prove to himself that he wasn't losing his grip on reality. Under the cover of darkness, John drove to the cemetery, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the rows of headstones. It was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by the wind. As he approached Emily's grave, he felt a strange weight in the air, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Setting up his laptop and wireless receiver once again, John connected to the hidden camera inside the coffin. His hands trembled as he pressed play, unsure of what he might discover this time. At first, the footage looked much like it had before, dark, silent, and seemingly empty. But then, just as John began to doubt whether he'd imagined the previous night's events, the glow returned. This time it was brighter, stronger, and it seemed to pulse with purpose, as if alive. Shadows danced along the edges of the frame, their movements fluid, yet deliberate. John leaned closer to the screen, his eyes wide with disbelief. Was this some kind of trick? A malfunction in the camera? Or was it something else? As he watched intently, another detail caught his attention. Faint sounds began to emerge from the audio track, soft whispers carried on the edge of hearing. They were indistinct at first, blending into the background noise like distant murmurs. But the longer John listened, the clearer they became. The voices weren't random. They were layered, overlapping, as though multiple people were speaking at once. Some sounded deep and resonant, while others were high-pitched and ethereal. None of them made immediate sense, but one voice stood out among the rest. It was soft, gentle, and unmistakably familiar. "Dad." John froze, his blood running cold. That single word echoed in his ears, sending shivers down his spine. There was no mistaking it. It was Emily's voice. Her tone was tender, almost hesitant, as though she were testing the waters of communication. "Dad," she called again, louder this time, cutting through the cacophony of other voices. Tears welled up in John's eyes as he replayed the clip over and over, desperate to be sure he wasn't imagining things. Every playback confirmed it. Emily was reaching out to him. But why and how? Questions swirled in his mind, each more bewildering than the last. Was this real? Had his grief driven him to hallucinate? Or was there truly something beyond the veil, a place where Emily still existed, waiting to reconnect with those she loved? John didn't have answers, but one thing was certain: he couldn't stop now. Whatever this was, it felt important, like a lifeline thrown to him in the depths of despair. Over the next few nights, John returned to the cemetery, driven by an insatiable need to understand. Each visit brought new revelations, though none provided clarity. The glowing light grew stronger with each recording, illuminating the interior of the coffin in ways that defied explanation. Sometimes it formed shapes, swirling patterns that resembled clouds or waves, but never anything concrete. The voices, too, evolved. While most remained unintelligible, Emily's voice became increasingly prominent, calling out to him with growing urgency. One particularly chilling evening, John noticed something unusual in the footage. Amidst the shifting shadows and glowing light, a figure appeared briefly, a silhouette standing near the edge of the frame. It was hazy, translucent, and barely visible, but unmistakably human-shaped. John's breath hitched as he rewound the video and played it again. The figure moved slowly, almost cautiously, before vanishing entirely. Though it lasted only a few seconds, the image burned itself into John's memory. Who or what was it? Was it Emily? Or was it someone or something else entirely? Despite his mounting fear, John couldn't bring himself to walk away. Each discovery pulled him deeper into the mystery, fueling both his hope and his dread. Part of him wanted to believe that Emily was trying to communicate, offering comfort from the other side. But another part, the rational, skeptical part, whispered warnings in the back of his mind. What if this wasn't Emily at all? What if he was opening a door better left closed? Still, John couldn't ignore the undeniable connection he felt during these late-night vigils. For the first time since her passing, he felt close to Emily again. The pain of her loss hadn't disappeared, but it was tempered by the possibility that she wasn't truly gone. That somewhere, somehow, she still existed. Whether this belief stemmed from reality or wishful thinking, John didn't care. All that mattered was the flicker of hope burning within him, urging him to keep watching, keep listening, and keep searching for answers. And so, night after night, John sat alone in the cemetery, staring at the glowing screen of his laptop. Each session left him more confused than the last, yet also more determined. Whatever lay ahead, whether truth or illusion, salvation or madness, he knew he couldn't turn back now. As the days turned into weeks, John Harper's nightly visits to the cemetery became a ritual. Each evening, he would sit by Emily's grave with his laptop, headphones clamped tightly over his ears, straining to decipher the whispers that seemed to grow louder with every passing night. The glowing light inside the coffin continued to pulse and shift, casting eerie shadows that danced across the polished wood. But it was the voices, the layered, overlapping murmurs, that consumed him most. They were no longer just faint echoes. They had taken on a life of their own, swirling around him like an invisible storm. At first, the voices remained fragmented, speaking in languages and tones John couldn't understand. Some sounded ancient, guttural, as though they belonged to another time or place. Others were melodic, almost musical, weaving through the static like distant hymns. Yet amidst this chaotic symphony, one voice always rose above the rest: Emily's. Her words were clearer now, spoken with a warmth and familiarity that made John's chest ache. She called out to him repeatedly, her tone shifting between playful, teasing, and tender reassurance. "Dad," she'd say, sometimes giggling softly, other times whispering so quietly he had to replay the clip multiple times to catch it. But there was something unsettling about the way the voices interacted. It wasn't just Emily speaking. It was as if she were part of a larger conversation, responding to questions or comments from unseen participants. John tried to piece together what they might be saying, rewinding and replaying sections of the audio until his head throbbed. Occasionally, snippets emerged that hinted at meaning. Not ready. Still here. Wait for me. These fragments sparked more questions than answers, leaving John both intrigued and unnerved. One particularly cold night, as frost blanketed the ground and his breath formed clouds in the air, John noticed something new in the footage. The glowing light inside the coffin began to take shape, not random patterns or swirls, but distinct forms. At first, they resembled letters scrawled in glowing ink, hovering faintly against the darkness. Squinting at the screen, John leaned closer, his heart racing. Slowly, painstakingly, the shapes resolved into words. The message read, "I'm okay." Tears spilled down John's cheeks as he stared at the screen, his hands trembling. For weeks, he'd been tormented by doubts. Was this real? Was he losing his mind? But seeing those three simple words, written in glowing script as though carved by some unseen hand, felt like a direct line to Emily. It wasn't just a message. It was proof. Proof that she was still aware, still present in some form. Reaching, out across the divide between life and death. Encouraged yet overwhelmed, John decided to test the connection further. He brought a notebook and pen with him on his next visit, scribbling a question before leaving it near Emily's grave. His handwriting shook as he wrote, "Are you happy?" He didn't know if this method would work, if Emily could even see or hear him, but he had to try. That night, as he reviewed the footage, he found another glowing message waiting for him. "Yes, I'm happy now." Relief washed over him, mingled with a deep sadness. Part of him wanted to cling to these moments, to keep Emily tethered to him through this strange, fragile link. But another part, a wiser, quieter part, knew he couldn't hold on to her forever. Still, he pressed on, asking more questions in hopes of understanding. Where was she? What did it feel like? Did she miss him? Each answer came slowly, pieced together from fragmented messages and glowing symbols. And while the responses offered comfort, they also carried an undercurrent of finality. One night, as John sifted through the latest recordings, he stumbled upon something unexpected. Among the usual whispers and glowing lights, a new sound emerged. A soft hum, rhythmic and steady, like a heartbeat. It pulsed in sync with the glowing light, growing stronger and weaker in waves. John listened intently, his brow furrowed. Then, suddenly, the hum transformed into music, a hauntingly beautiful melody that filled the audio track. It wasn't any song he recognized, yet it felt achingly familiar, as though it stirred memories buried deep within his soul. As the music played, the camera captured something extraordinary. A translucent figure appeared beside the coffin, shimmering like heat waves rising off asphalt. Its outline was hazy at first, indistinct, but gradually it solidified into the shape of a young woman. Though her features were blurred, there was no mistaking who she was. She stood silently, gazing down at the coffin with an expression of serene calm. Her presence radiated peace, a quiet assurance that all was well. John froze, his breath catching in his throat. This wasn't just a shadow or a trick of the light, it was Emily. Or at least, some version of her. She didn't move or speak, but her very existence in that moment was enough to bring John to his knees. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered her name aloud, though he knew she couldn't hear him. For the first time since her passing, he felt truly connected to her, not through words or messages, but through the undeniable truth of her presence. When the figure faded back into the darkness, John sat motionless, staring at the screen long after the footage ended. His mind raced with thoughts and emotions too complex to untangle. Was this closure? A glimpse into the afterlife? Or simply the manifestation of a grieving father's desperate imagination? He didn't have answers, but one thing was certain. Emily had reached out to him in a way that transcended logic and reason. She had shown him that she was at peace, that she was happy, and that she wanted him to let go. Yet letting go was easier said than done. As much as John wanted to believe Emily's messages were meant to bring him comfort, they also stirred up conflicting feelings. Guilt gnawed at him for considering moving on, for entertaining the idea of living without her. How could he ever fill the void she left behind? How could he honor her memory while building a future without her? Despite these doubts, John began to notice subtle changes within himself. The crushing weight of grief that had once threatened to consume him started to lift, replaced by a bittersweet sense of acceptance. He realized that holding on to Emily didn't mean clinging to his pain. It meant cherishing the love they shared, and carrying it forward in everything he did. With each glowing message, each whispered word, Emily was guiding him toward healing, urging him to step back into the world and live fully again. And so, as the nights grew colder and the cemetery lay shrouded in mist, John continued his vigil, listening to the voices and watching the light. Though he didn't know how much longer the connection would last or if it would fade completely, he vowed to cherish every moment. Because in those fleeting glimpses of Emily, he found not only solace, but also a profound reminder of the bond they shared, a bond that not even death could sever. John Harper's nightly vigils at the cemetery had become more than just a desperate attempt to reconnect with Emily. They were now a sacred ritual, a lifeline tethering him to the fragile threads of hope and understanding. Each visit brought new revelations. Each message from beyond deepened his connection to his daughter. And yet, with every interaction, John felt the weight of an unspoken truth pressing down on him. The messages weren't just comforting, they carried a purpose, a gentle nudge toward something greater. One evening, as frost clung stubbornly to the ground and the wind whispered through the trees, John arrived at Emily's grave with a heavy heart. He'd begun to notice a pattern in her communications. While the glowing light and ethereal voices continued to captivate him, the tone of her messages had shifted subtly over time. At first, they were simple reassurances. "I'm okay. I'm happy now." But lately her words carried a deeper meaning, almost as if she were preparing him for something. That night, when he connected to the camera inside the coffin, the footage revealed another glowing message. This one was clearer than ever before, written in bold, shimmering letters that seemed to pulse with urgency. "Let me go." The words hit John like a punch to the chest. His breath hitched, and for a moment, he couldn't move. The phrase echoed in his mind, reverberating through every fiber of his being. Let her go? How could he? She was his daughter, his entire world. Even now, weeks after her passing, the thought of moving forward without her felt impossible. Yet, as much as it pained him, he knew these words weren't meant to hurt. They were a plea, a loving request from Emily herself. Tears streamed down John's face as he replayed the message over and over, each repetition driving the point home. Emily wasn't asking him to forget her. She was asking him to release her, to free her spirit so she could move on fully, without the weight of his grief holding her back. It was a selfless act, one that required immense courage on both their parts, and though it broke his heart, John realized this was what true love looked like, letting go, even when it hurt the most. Determined to honor her wishes, John decided to write her a letter. Sitting under the dim glow of his laptop screen, he poured his soul onto the page, writing everything he'd been too afraid to say aloud. He told her how much he missed her, how empty the house felt without her laughter echoing through the halls. He confessed his guilt for not being able to protect her, for failing to shield her from the accident that took her life. But most importantly, he thanked her for the joy she brought into his life, for the memories they shared, and for reaching out to him in his darkest moments. "I'll always love you, Emily," he wrote, his hand trembling as the pen hovered over the paper. "And I'll never stop missing you. But if you're ready to move on, then I'll let you go. You deserve peace, sweetheart. More than anything, I want you to be happy." The next morning, John returned to the cemetery with the letter tucked safely inside an envelope. He placed it gently on Emily's grave, weighing it down with a small stone shaped like a heart. As he stood there, staring at the freshly turned earth, he whispered a silent prayer. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel the crushing weight of despair. Instead, there was a strange sense of calm, a quiet knowing that Emily was still with him, watching over him, guiding him even as she prepared to leave. That night, when John reviewed the camera footage, he found another message waiting for him. This one was shorter but infinitely more powerful. "Thank you, Daddy." The words glowed brightly against the darkness of the coffin, radiating warmth and gratitude. John's eyes filled with tears once again, but this time they were tears of relief. Emily understood, she forgave him, and she was ready to move on. But the surprises didn't end there. As John continued to watch the footage, the glowing light began to shift and swirl, forming intricate patterns that danced across the screen. Slowly, the shapes coalesced into a single image, a pair of wings, radiant and majestic, stretching outward as though embracing the universe. The sight left John breathless. It was beautiful, awe-inspiring, and undeniably symbolic. Emily wasn't just moving on, she was ascending, spreading her wings and stepping into a new existence. For several minutes, John sat motionless, unable to look away. The glowing wings remained suspended in the air, casting soft beams of light that illuminated the interior of the coffin. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they began to dissolve, fading into the darkness until all that remained was silence. When the final traces of light disappeared, John closed his laptop and leaned back against the cold stone bench. His body felt drained, but his spirit was lighter than it had been in weeks. He realized that Emily had given him the greatest gift anyone could offer: closure. Through her messages, her presence, and her unwavering love, she had shown him that death wasn't the end. It was simply a transition. And while he would always carry her memory in his heart, he no longer needed to cling to her as tightly as he once did. Over the next few days, John noticed subtle changes within himself. The sharp edges of his grief began to soften, replaced by a bittersweet acceptance. He started taking walks around the neighborhood, breathing in the crisp autumn air and marveling at the beauty of the changing leaves. He reconnected with old friends, sharing stories about Emily and laughing at cherished memories. Slowly but surely, he began to rebuild his life, not forgetting her, but honoring her by living fully and authentically. Still, he couldn't bring himself to abandon the nightly ritual just yet. Each evening he returned to the cemetery hoping for one last glimpse of Emily, but the glowing light had vanished and the voices had fallen silent. Though part of him longed to hear her voice one more time, he knew deep down that she had said everything she needed to say. She had guided him through the darkest chapter of his life, helping him find his way back to the light. On what he believed to be his final visit, John sat quietly beside Emily's grave, staring up at the star-filled sky. The night was unusually peaceful, the kind of stillness that felt almost holy. As he gazed at the constellations twinkling above, he imagined Emily among them, her spirit, soaring freely, untethered by the constraints of mortality. Somewhere in the vast expanse of the universe, she was smiling down at him, proud of the progress he'd made. Before leaving, John whispered softly into the night, his voice steady and filled with love. "Goodbye, my sweet girl. Fly high and know that I'll always be here, cheering you on from below." With those words, he rose to his feet, brushed the dirt from his pants, and walked away. Behind him, the cemetery lay quiet and serene, bathed in moonlight. Though the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, John knew he could face it, one step at a time, with Emily's love lighting the way. The weeks that followed Emily's final message were a blend of sorrow and healing for John Harper. Each morning, he woke up with a heavy heart, the absence of his daughter still a gaping wound in his life. But as the days passed, he began to notice small changes, not just in himself but in the world around him. It was as if Emily's presence lingered subtly, not through glowing lights or whispered voices, but in the quiet moments that reminded him of her spirit. One crisp autumn afternoon, while walking through the park near their home, John stumbled upon a bench they used to sit on together. They'd often bring sandwiches and watch the ducks paddle lazily across the pond. As he sat down, memories flooded back. The sound of her laughter, the way she'd toss breadcrumbs too enthusiastically, scattering birds in every direction. For the first time since her passing, those memories didn't feel painful. Instead, they felt warm, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. He smiled faintly, imagining Emily sitting beside him, rolling her eyes playfully at his habit of overthinking everything. It wasn't just random moments that brought her closer. It was also the people who surrounded him, friends and family, who had initially tried to comfort him with words they hoped would ease his pain, now approached him differently. They spoke openly about Emily, sharing stories of her kindness, her humor, and the little quirks that made her unique. One neighbor even handed him a photo album filled with pictures of Emily from community events and school plays. "She touched so many lives," the neighbor said softly, patting John's shoulder. "We miss her too." These gestures meant more to John than anyone could have guessed. They reminded him that Emily hadn't just been his daughter, she'd been a beacon of light for everyone fortunate enough to know her. Her legacy extended far beyond his grief, and recognizing that helped him take another step forward. But perhaps the most profound change came during one of his nightly visits to the cemetery. By this point, John no longer expected anything extraordinary. From the camera inside the coffin, the glowing messages had stopped and the whispers had faded into silence. Still, he couldn't resist returning one last time, needing to say a proper goodbye before moving on completely. That night, as he reviewed the footage, something unexpected appeared on the screen. At first, it seemed like static, a flickering distortion that might have been caused by interference. But then slowly, a figure emerged. It was translucent, shimmering like moonlight on water, yet unmistakably human-shaped. The figure stood beside the coffin, gazing down with an expression of serene calm. Though its features were blurred, there was no mistaking who it was: Emily. John's breath caught in his throat as he leaned closer to the screen. This wasn't like the shadowy silhouette he'd seen before. It was vivid, almost tangible, as if she were truly standing there. She wore a flowing dress that seemed to ripple in an invisible breeze, and her hair cascaded around her shoulders in soft waves. Most striking of all was her smile, a radiant, comforting grin that lit up the entire frame. For several moments, she simply stood there, looking directly into the camera as though she could see John through the lens. Then, without warning, she raised her hand and waved, a small, gentle gesture that sent tears streaming down his face. Before he could process what was happening, she began to fade, dissolving into the darkness until only the faintest trace of her remained. When the screen went completely black, John sat frozen, unable to move or speak. He replayed the footage multiple times, each viewing leaving him more emotional than the last. This wasn't just a message or a sign. It was Emily, herself saying goodbye in the most personal way possible. Her wave was a farewell, yes, but it was also a reassurance. She was okay. She was happy. And she wanted him to be happy too. The next day, John decided to honor her memory in a tangible way. He gathered some of Emily's favorite belongings, her books, art supplies, and clothes, and donated them to local charities and schools. Sorting through her things was bittersweet, but it gave him a sense of purpose. With each item he packed away, he whispered a thank you to her, acknowledging the joy she'd brought into his life and the lives of others. In her bedroom, he found a box of old photographs and mementos tucked beneath her bed. Among them was a handwritten note she'd written months before the accident. It read, "Life is short, but love is forever. No matter where I am, I'll always be with you." Reading those words, John felt a surge of gratitude. Emily had known somehow that her time on earth might be fleeting. Yet she'd lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind a legacy of kindness that would endure long after she was gone. Inspired by her note, John decided to create something permanent, a tribute to Emily that would allow others to benefit from her generosity and compassion. He reached out to a local organization that supported grieving families and offered to host a memorial event in her honor. The idea quickly gained traction, and soon, friends, neighbors, and even strangers joined forces to organize a day dedicated to celebrating Emily's life. On the day of the event, the community center buzzed with activity. There were art workshops for children, storytelling sessions featuring Emily's favorite books, and a slideshow of photos showcasing her brightest moments. In the center of the room stood a large canvas where attendees were invited to paint or write messages inspired by Emily's spirit. By the end of the day, the canvas was covered in colorful designs and heartfelt notes, all testaments to the impact she'd had on those around her. As John stood at the edge of the crowd, watching people laugh and share stories, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. This was how Emily would have wanted to be remembered, not as a tragic figure defined by her death, but as a vibrant soul whose love continued to inspire others. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, John returned to the cemetery one final time. He carried with him a single framed photograph of Emily, taken during one of their picnics by the pond. Her smile was radiant, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Placing the photo gently on her grave, he knelt down and whispered, "You're free now, sweetheart. Go shine your light wherever it's needed." A cool breeze swept through the cemetery, rustling the leaves above. For a moment, John thought he heard her voice again. Soft, distant, but unmistakable. "I love you, Daddy," it said, fading into the night. Rising to his feet, John took a deep breath and turned away from the grave. He didn't look back. Somehow he knew Emily wasn't there anymore. Not in the physical sense, at least. She was everywhere. In the rustle of the wind, the laughter of children, the kindness of strangers, and she would always be with him, not as a ghost trapped in a coffin, but as a guiding star lighting his path forward. With each step he took away from the cemetery, John felt lighter, freer. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in months he felt ready to face it. Emily had given him the tools to heal, her love, her wisdom, and her unwavering belief in the goodness of life. All he had to do was carry that torch and let it guide him toward a brighter future. Months had passed since John Harper's final visit to Emily's grave, and though the ache of her absence never fully disappeared, it had softened into something more bearable, a quiet longing rather than a sharp, unbearable pain. Life moved forward, as it always does. But John found himself navigating it differently now. He carried Emily with him in everything he did, not as a burden, but as a source of strength and inspiration. The memorial event held in her honor had sparked something within him, a desire to keep her memory alive in meaningful ways. What began as a single day of celebration evolved into an ongoing effort to support others who were grieving. John partnered with the local organization that had helped organize the event, volunteering his time to mentor families who had lost loved ones. At first, he was hesitant. How could he possibly offer guidance when he still felt so raw himself? But as he shared his story, he realized that vulnerability was its own kind of strength. His honesty resonated with others, giving them permission to grieve openly, while also reminding them that healing was possible. One evening, during one of these mentoring sessions, a young mother approached John after the group meeting. Her eyes were red from crying, and she clutched a crumpled tissue in her hands. "I don't know how to move on," she confessed, her voice trembling. "It feels like I'm betraying my son if I even try." John nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "You're not betraying him," he said gently. "He wouldn't want you to stop living. It's okay to miss him, and it's okay to let yourself smile again. You carry him with you in every step you take." His words seemed to ease some of the weight on her shoulders, and over time, their conversations became less about grief and more about finding joy in small moments. Watching her progress reminded John of his own journey, the slow, painful steps toward acceptance and peace. Helping others navigate their loss brought a sense of purpose to his life, filling the void left by Emily with acts of kindness and compassion. As winter gave way to spring, John noticed subtle changes in his daily routine. The house no longer felt suffocatingly empty. Instead, it buzzed with activity. He started inviting friends over for dinner, hosting game nights, and even adopting a scruffy rescue dog named Max. The pup quickly became a constant companion, curling up at John's feet as he worked or nudging him playfully when he grew too quiet. Max wasn't a replacement for Emily, but his presence reminded John that life could still hold warmth and laughter, even after unimaginable loss. On weekends, John took long drives through the countryside, revisiting places he and Emily used to love. He stopped at roadside diners, hiked along wooded trails, and spent hours sitting by lakes watching the water ripple under the sun. Each trip was a reminder of the beauty in the world, a testament to the fact that life continued to unfold in breathtaking ways. Sometimes he'd bring along a journal, jotting down thoughts and reflections inspired by these outings. Writing became therapeutic, a way to process his emotions and celebrate the lessons Emily had taught him about resilience and hope. One sunny afternoon, while wandering through a farmer's market, John stumbled upon a stall selling handmade jewelry. Among the necklaces and bracelets was a delicate silver pendant shaped like a bird in flight. Something about it caught his eye. It reminded him of the glowing wings he'd seen in the coffin footage months earlier. Without hesitation, he purchased the pendant and wore it around his neck every day afterward. It served as a symbol of Emily's freedom, a reminder that she was soaring somewhere far beyond the confines of grief. That summer, John decided to tackle a project he'd been avoiding for years, renovating Emily's bedroom. For months, he'd kept it untouched, unable to face the thought of changing anything. But now, standing in the doorway, he realized it was time. With the help of a close friend, he transformed the space into a cozy reading nook, complete with bookshelves stocked with Emily's favorite novels, a plush armchair, and soft lighting. In the corner, he placed a framed photo of her, surrounded by fresh flowers. The room didn't erase her memory. It celebrated it, creating a space where her spirit could live on. As the seasons changed once again, autumn arrived with its vibrant colors and crisp air. On a particularly beautiful morning, John received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from a woman who had attended the memorial event several months prior. Inside the envelope was a heartfelt note thanking him for sharing his story and inspiring her to seek help during her darkest days. "Your daughter must have been an incredible person," the letter read. "Her light shines through you." Holding the note in his hands, John felt a surge of gratitude, not just for the kind words but for the realization that Emily's impact extended far beyond his own life. She had touched countless others, leaving behind ripples of love and kindness that continued to spread. Knowing this gave him comfort, reinforcing the belief that her legacy would endure long after he was gone. By the end of the year, John found himself reflecting on how far he'd come. Grief was no longer a constant shadow looming over his every move. It was a part of him, yes, but not the entirety of who he was. He still missed Emily fiercely, and there were days when tears came unbidden, triggered by a song, a scent, or a fleeting memory. But those moments didn't overwhelm him anymore. Instead, they reminded him of the depth of their bond, a connection that transcended life and death. On New Year's Eve, John stood outside under a sky ablaze with stars. Beside him, Max wagged his tail happily, oblivious to the significance of the moment. As fireworks exploded in bursts of color overhead, John closed his eyes and whispered a silent message to Emily. "Thank you," he said softly, "for everything." When he opened his eyes, he felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. Somewhere, somehow, he knew Emily was listening and smiling. She had guided him through the hardest chapter of his life, teaching him that love never truly ends. Even in her absence, she remained a guiding force, urging him to embrace life fully and fearlessly. In the months and years that followed, John continued to honor Emily's memory in countless ways. He volunteered regularly, wrote letters to old friends, and explored new hobbies that brought him joy. Though the road ahead wasn't without challenges, he faced each one with courage and grace, knowing that Emily's love would always be his anchor. And so, John Harper learned to live again, not forgetting but remembering, not letting go entirely but holding on in a different way. Through his actions, his choices, and his unwavering commitment to kindness, he ensured that Emily's light would never fade. Because even in death, love finds a way to shine brightly, illuminating the hearts of those left behind.